During the Vietnam War, the Communist NVA and their Viet Cong allies soon learned that they couldn't compete in the field against the superior firepower of the United States and the other Allied forces. In response, they adopted a guerrilla strategy, striking out at their more ponderous foes before melting back into the dense undergrowth of the Vietnamese jungle. The intense vegetation wasn't enough for concealment, though, as the Americans utilized some of the most advanced surveillance and reconnaissance methods available at the time. In order to avoid detection, the VC and NVA constructed an elaborate network of underground tunnels, giving them a refuge from the overwhelming might of their enemies. This underground world became one of the most ingenious military strategies in history, a subterranean city where thousands lived, fought, and survived beneath their enemies' feet. The tunnels utilized by the Viet Cong were first dug by the Viet Minh, Vietnamese nationalists fighting against French colonial rule in the aftermath of World War II. A decade later, during the American involvement, the tunnel network expanded, covering hundreds of miles and multiple districts. Some even stretched into neighboring Cambodia. For example, the Siu Chi tunnel system north of Saigon had 130 miles of passages. Some of the tunnels were simple burrows dug into the soil, while others were complex, multi-layered constructions with specialized compartments for various purposes. To put this in perspective, imagine an underground city stretching from Washington, D.C. to Philadelphia, all carved by hand, mostly at night, using simple tools. This wasn't just a hiding place, it was an entire underground civilization designed to wage war from below. As the main purpose of the tunnels was concealment, emphasis was placed on hiding the tunnel entrances. These access points could be located at seemingly random locations in the jungle but were often located in villages, placed under cooking pots in homes, buried under sacks of rice, or in other out-of-the-way locations. When the Americans started using dogs to sniff out the entrances, the openings would be placed in pig corrals and covered in manure, the scent throwing off the search. These entrances were tiny, further limiting access, sometimes being less than 2 feet in diameter. Entry points could also be located underwater, requiring a swim to access, something heavily laden Americans would find impossible. Ventilation shafts would likewise be camouflaged under shrubbery, allowing fresh air to circulate while keeping the tunnels a secret. The VC and NVA would often live in the tunnels during the day, venturing out at night for military operations. The ingenuity was remarkable. Some entrances were so cleverly disguised that American soldiers could stand directly on top of them without knowing. Trapdoors were designed to support the weight of a person walking over them but would open easily from below, allowing VC fighters to emerge, attack, and disappear within seconds. Life underground, the subterranean facilities. While underground, they made use of the many subterranean facilities that were carved into the soil. Though often used to move troops without detection, there were many facilities for long-term stays underground. Living quarters. There were sleeping quarters, often consisting of multi-layered hammocks to save space. These cramped chambers could house dozens of soldiers, with men sleeping in shifts based on their operational schedules. Personal space was a luxury no one could afford. Soldiers slept inches from one another in the oppressive heat and humidity. There were also medical facilities for patching up wounded soldiers. These would be lined with salvaged American parachutes in an attempt to keep out bacteria that was ever present in the damp soil. Doctors and nurses worked by candlelight or dim flashlight, performing surgeries and amputations without anesthesia in many cases. The wounded often had to bite down on bamboo to keep from crying out and alerting nearby American forces to the tunnel's location. Weapons production. Small-scale weapon production facilities would manufacture everything from improvised landmines to punji stakes. These underground workshops were remarkably sophisticated, with VC fighters melting down unexploded American ordnance to create new weapons, fashioning booby traps from scrap metal, and producing thousands of the deadly sharpened bamboo stakes that terrorized American soldiers. Storage and supply. Other areas served as armories for weapons, supply caches, kitchens, and other storage and living areas. Food was stored in sealed containers to protect it from the dampness and vermin. Rice, dried fish, and preserved vegetables formed the staple diet. Water was carefully rationed, and every drop was precious. Cultural life. In the more established tunnels, there were also dedicated cinemas where propaganda films and theatrical performances would be shown to bolster morale and reinforce the message of the Vietnamese cause. An entire culture developed underground, which included weddings, births, and other aspects of day-to-day life. Imagine, couples getting married by candlelight in an earthen chamber, children being born in the same tunnels where soldiers prepared for combat, families celebrating Tet, Vietnamese New Year, while American forces searched for them overhead. This wasn't just a military installation, it was a living, breathing community forced underground. Lighting in the tunnels was limited, and any illumination was provided by candles or flashlights carried by individuals. Occasionally, bicycle-powered generators could be utilized to provide electricity. These would be in specialist locations such as the weapons manufacturing sections or medical wards. The darkness was nearly absolute in most areas. Fighters learned to navigate by touch and memory, counting steps and feeling for specific markers carved into the walls. This gave them an enormous advantage over American tunnel rats who relied on flashlights, making themselves easy targets. Water supply. Wells would also be dug to underground aquifers, since water supplies could be contaminated by chemicals such as Agent Orange. This added a degree of self-sufficiency to the complexes and allowed the denizens to remain underground, avoiding detection from their enemies. These wells were engineering marvels, sometimes dug 30 feet or more to reach clean water. The VC developed systems to test water for contamination and could survive entirely underground for weeks when necessary. The harsh reality, living conditions. In spite of the attempts to make life in the network livable, conditions were still miserable. As lighting was scarce, the ambience was always dim and depressing. The air was foul in spite of the ventilation shafts, and organic matter such as food or clothing would rot quickly in the damp air. Temperature and humidity. The tunnels were stifling. Temperatures often exceeded 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and humidity approached 100%. There was no air conditioning, no fans, just the minimal circulation from carefully placed ventilation shafts. Men would sweat constantly, leading to dehydration and skin infection. Various animal species also made themselves at home among the Viet Cong, including rats, spiders, scorpions, centipedes, and a plethora of venomous snakes. Among the most insidious was a small parasite called a chigger, a species of mite that burrows into the skin, causing itching red welts to appear. Soldiers learned to check their bodies constantly for leeches, which would attach in the darkness. Bamboo vipers, krites, and cobras would slither through the tunnels, and a bite in the confined darkness could be fatal. The constant scurrying of rats, some as large as cats, became such a common sound that soldiers learned to ignore it. The smell of death. To make matters worse, the tunnels would be used as makeshift cemeteries. As the Vietnam War was not about seizing territory, American planners relied on a body count of enemy combatants to determine the effectiveness of their campaigns. To frustrate their enemy, the Viet Cong would drag their deceased into the tunnels. There, the bodies would rot quickly in the damp soil, the rancid smell permeating the surrounding area. This served a dual purpose, denying the Americans their body count and psychologically affecting any tunnel rats who discovered these chambers of death. Some sections of tunnels became known as death chambers, where the smell was so overwhelming that even hardened VC fighters avoided them unless absolutely necessary. Defensive measures, a deadly labyrinth. In spite of all their efforts, tunnel entrances were often discovered. The tunnel network had a series of defenses to defeat any enemy infiltration, turning the underground passages into death traps for intruders. Design features. The tunnels would not be in a straight path but make random and often sharp turns, perfect spots for an ambush. The elevation could also change rapidly, making navigation difficult under the best of circumstances. Those unfamiliar with the layout could easily become lost in the underground labyrinth. Some tunnels intentionally led to dead ends where VC fighters would wait in ambush. Others would spiral confusingly, designed to disorient and exhaust pursuers. The architecture itself was a weapon. Punji pits. Punji pits were among the most common traps, false floors that would give way, dropping the victim on a series of sharpened bamboo stakes. These stakes were often smeared with human or animal feces to cause infection in any wounds. A soldier who fell into a punji pit would be impaled on multiple stakes, and even if rescued, infection could prove fatal. Explosive traps. Tripwires were also used, which would be attached to a grenade or other explosive device. The tunnels, already claustrophobic under the best of circumstances, would narrow at arbitrary points, forcing the traveler to crawl on their bellies. Viet Cong would wait at these choke points, shooting or stabbing hapless enemy tunnel rats as they crawled through the tiny opening. Small niches were dug into the side of the tunnel, allowing the defenders to ambush unwary trespassers as they passed by. These niches could be covered with a thin layer of clay, the only opening a small slit at eye level, making it virtually undetectable until a spear-wielding VC burst through. A sudden sharp vertical climb would have a waiting VC armed with a grenade, who would toss the explosive before sealing the passage with a door and a sandbag. The confined space would amplify the grenade's blast, ensuring maximum casualties. Wildlife as weapons. Even the wildlife that inhabited the tunnel network could be used as a trap against unwanted visitors. Trapdoors could open, releasing swarms of venomous scorpions onto the unwitting tunnel rat. Venomous bamboo vipers could be used as a warning system, suspended from the ceiling at a narrow choke point. When encountered, the Americans had few options to deal with the tunnels. They were dug deep enough that strikes from B-52 heavy bombers would have limited effect. Likewise, the use of explosives was inefficient, as there could be multiple access points miles apart, so demolition charges would have limited effect. Chemical warfare attempts. The tunnels were also designed to withstand gas, so smoke grenades and CS tear gas would rise to the surface through carefully placed ventilation shafts. The VC had created one-way valves and airlocks that would prevent gas from penetrating deep into the tunnel system while still allowing fresh air in. Flooding attempts. Attempts at flooding the tunnels would prove equally ineffective. The tunnels were designed with drainage systems and watertight doors that could seal off flooded sections. What's more, many tunnels connected to underground rivers or aquifers, making flooding impossible or counterproductive. Each tunnel would have to be cleared manually, a task that was considered one of the most dangerous and downright unpleasant jobs of the war. The tunnel rats would descend into the subterranean labyrinth armed with a flashlight, a .45 pistol, a knife, and incredible courage, seizing documents, sabotaging supplies, and capturing prisoners. These brave soldiers, usually smaller-statured men who could navigate the cramped spaces, faced unimaginable horrors in the darkness. They crawled through spaces where they couldn't turn around, never knowing if the next turn would bring them face-to-face with an enemy fighter, a booby trap, or a venomous snake. In spite of their efforts, however, the tunnels remained in use throughout the war. For every entrance discovered and destroyed, the VC would dig new ones. The underground network was like a living organism, constantly adapting and growing. The tunnels could be used on a tactical level. The Viet Cong would ambush American patrols, then fall back to their underground lair, leaving their enemies baffled as they seemed to disappear into thin air. Decoys would appear to flee from pursuing Americans, only for hidden VC to spring out and ambush before hiding again. This guerrilla tactic was psychologically devastating for American soldiers. The enemy could be anywhere and nowhere. A village that appeared empty during the day could house hundreds of VC fighters underground, emerging at night to attack and disappearing again by dawn. Strategic impact, the Tet Offensive. The tunnels could also be used on a strategic level. In 1968, the Tet Offensive saw massive strikes across Vietnam, hitting hundreds of installations in a coordinated effort to destabilize the South Vietnamese and their allies. Planned for months in secret, the operation made extensive use of the tunnel network. Thousands of troops were moved underground, undetected, emerging en masse to lash out against their targets. The Americans and their allies were caught by surprise and would never fully recover from the shock of the offensive. The tunnels allowed VC forces to position themselves in the very heart of Saigon, beneath the city, under American bases, within striking distance of the most heavily defended targets in South Vietnam. When the offensive began, enemy fighters seemed to materialize from nowhere, having crawled through tunnels to reach their attack positions. Psychological warfare. The existence of the tunnels had a profound psychological impact on American forces. Soldiers never knew if they were walking over enemy positions. The ground itself became the enemy. Paranoia was constant. Every village, every rice paddy, every seemingly innocent farmer's hut could be concealing a tunnel entrance. This uncertainty wore on American morale. How do you fight an enemy you can't see? How do you win against an opponent who can disappear underground? The tunnels represented the perfect defensive system against a superior military force, making the advantages of air power, artillery, and advanced technology largely irrelevant. The human cost. Life in the tunnels took an enormous toll on the VC and NVA fighters who lived there. Many suffered from malnutrition, respiratory diseases from the poor air quality, skin infections from the constant dampness, and psychological trauma from living like moles for years at a time. Malaria was rampant. Tuberculosis spread quickly in the confined spaces. Many fighters went blind or developed severe vision problems from years in near-total darkness. The constant stress, poor nutrition, and exposure to disease meant that even those who survived the war often had their health permanently damaged. Yet they persevered. The tunnels represented their determination to resist, their refusal to surrender despite overwhelming odds. In those dark, cramped, dangerous passages, the will of the Vietnamese people to fight for their independence found its most literal expression. Legacy and preservation. Today, portions of the Siu Chi tunnels have been preserved and widened for tourists. Visitors can crawl through sanitized sections, experiencing just a fraction of what life was like underground. The tunnels have become a symbol of Vietnamese resistance and ingenuity, a testament to what determination and clever engineering can accomplish against superior firepower. Modern military analysts study the tunnels as a masterclass in asymmetric warfare. How do you defeat an enemy with superior technology? You change the battlefield. You go where their advantages don't matter. You turn their strengths into weaknesses. The underground network of tunnels was vital to the success of the communist war effort. They allowed the lightly armed and equipped Viet Cong and NVA to stand up against one of the most powerful militaries in the world and prevail in spite of the odds stacked against them. These weren't just holes in the ground, they were an entire underground civilization, a military strategy, a symbol of resistance, and a psychological weapon all rolled into one. They represented the Vietnamese people's determination to fight on their own terms, to use their knowledge of the land against an occupying force, and to never surrender no matter the cost. The tunnels of Siu Chi and countless other locations across Vietnam stand as monuments to human ingenuity, determination, and the will to survive. They show that in war, the most advanced technology doesn't always win. Sometimes, the most effective weapon is the willingness to endure unimaginable hardship in pursuit of your goals. In those dark, cramped, dangerous tunnels, ordinary people became extraordinary. They lived, loved, fought, and died in the earth itself, turning Vietnam's soil into both fortress and weapon. The tunnels didn't just hide the Viet Cong, they embodied their strategy, their spirit, and ultimately, their victory. This underground world, carved by hand and defended by courage, changed the course of history and proved that sometimes the greatest fortress isn't built with steel and concrete, but with dirt, determination, and an unwavering refusal to give up.